A city doesn't just disappear, right? Especially not a capital city. But that is exactly what happened to Jamestown, the very first permanent English settlement in North America. So, how does a capital, a center of power, just vanish? Well, to get to the bottom of it, we have to uncover a story of fire, a brutal rebellion, and a wound that, it turns out, never really healed. Just try to imagine it. You're standing in the streets of your own capital city, and you hear those words. And the most chilling part, that's not some foreign enemy. No, that was William Drummond, one of their own, speaking in the fall of 1676. That one sentence, it just captures the raw fury that was about to literally burn Jamestown to the ground. And that really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? Why on earth would colonists torch their own capital? I mean, it seems completely unthinkable. But the answer, well, it reveals a really deep and bitter crack running right through their society. So, on September 19th, 1676, the unthinkable happens. The men of what became known as Bacon's Rebellion, they march right into Jamestown and they deliberately set it on fire. Now, this wasn't some accident, a stray spark or a cannonball gone wrong. This was a calculated political statement. You see, for these rebels, they weren't just burning buildings. They were burning an idea. To them, Jamestown itself, the State House, the fancy homes, the warehouses, it was the physical embodiment of a corrupt government, an elite class that was completely deaf to their problems. A fire like that doesn't just happen overnight. It was really the violent climax of a story that had been simmering for years. So to really understand the flames, we've got to look at what was fueling them. All the grievances that were brewing out on the very tense frontier of the Virginia colony. The whole conflict really boiled down to two opposing sides. On one side, you've got Nathaniel Bacon and the settlers on the frontier. These guys were living on the dangerous edge of the colony, and they were desperately demanding protection and a voice in their own government. And then, on the other side, you have Governor William Berkeley and his inner circle. They had a total monopoly on the very profitable fur trade and all the political power. Of course, they were profiting from the status quo, so they had zero interest in changing anything. So you can basically trace all this tension back to three main sparks. First, there was the economic stuff. If you weren't in Berkeley's club, you were completely locked out of the fur trade, which was the real moneymaker. Second, pure political corruption. A small group of elites basically ran everything. And third, and this was probably the most urgent for a lot of people, was frontier insecurity. These settlers felt completely abandoned and unprotected from attacks. So Bacon's forces, they win this huge symbolic victory by burning the capital. But here's the crazy part. The rebellion itself was incredibly fragile. In fact, it fell apart almost as quickly as it started. I mean, just look at how fast this whole thing unraveled. Just over a month after his big victory at Jamestown, Nathaniel Bacon suddenly dies of dysentery. And without its charismatic leader, the entire movement just crumbles. Governor Berkeley, he comes roaring back with a vengeance, but his crackdown is so brutal that he himself gets recalled to England in disgrace. It was just a chaotic, messy end for everyone involved. And you don't have to take my word for how brutal Berkeley was. These are his own words. There is absolutely no hint of reconciliation here, just pure, uncut vengeance. He ended up hanging over 20 of the rebel leaders, a move that was so extreme it shocked even the king's own investigators. Okay, so the rebellion is crushed, both leaders are out of the picture, and the crown orders the colonists to do one thing: rebuild your capital. But as we're about to see, rebuilding with bricks is one thing. Rebuilding a community's trust and vitality, that's a whole different story. And to their credit, they did try. By 1686, a brand new, pretty impressive brick state house was finished. On the surface, it looked like a serious commitment to Jamestown's future, a big statement that the capital was back in business. But that's the great irony. While this big, fancy new building was rising from the ashes, the town all around it was just withering away. The spirit of Jamestown, it was already gone. So what were these fatal wounds? Well, first off, the rebellion had proven that Jamestown wasn't just vulnerable to foreign enemies, but to its own angry people. Second, the wealthy elite, they retreated. They much preferred the safety and comfort of their own self-sufficient plantations over a fragile, scarred town. Plus, the core problems that started the whole rebellion were never actually solved. So now the town itself was just this constant physical reminder of that trauma. So for another decade, the town just kind of limped along. It was basically a hollowed-out administrative shell. All it really needed was one final push to send it over the edge and, well, pave the way for a brand new capital. And you are not gonna believe what that final push was. In 1698, in what has to be a darkly comic twist of fate, that brand new expensive brick state house, it burned down. Again. Now, this time it was just an accident, but the damage was done. It was the perfect excuse they'd been waiting for. So if you pull it all together, you can see this clear progression, right? The first fire in 1676, that was a violent, intentional rejection of the old corrupt order. The rebuilding that followed was really just a hollow attempt to put things back the way they were. And that final, accidental fire in 98, it gave the leaders the perfect out to embrace a completely new vision by moving to Williamsburg. Bacon's fire didn't just burn buildings, it completely destroyed Jamestown's legitimacy for good. So in the end, the move wasn't really a practical decision about a burned-down building, it was a psychological one. The colony's leaders, they jumped at the chance to physically walk away from the site of Virginia's first great Civil War, to just leave the scorched earth and all those bitter memories behind them. So we're left with this question. The story of Jamestown's fall isn't just about destruction, it's also about creation. It really shows us that sometimes for a new vision to be born, like the carefully planned Enlightenment-era capital of Williamsburg, the old one, with all of its flaws and painful memories, has to be abandoned and left to the history books.